The predawn silence at Shaw Air Force Base was shattered by the roar of F-16 engines as Captain Jessica Rodriguez completed her final pre-flight check. In the dim hangar light, her reflection caught the side of her fighter's canopy, a woman who had been told countless times she didn't belong in a cockpit built for war. But as the first rays of South Carolina's sun painted the tarmac gold, Jessica was about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in any conflict isn't the latest technology or the biggest bomb, it's the pilot everyone underestimated. What happened next would not only change the course of an entire war, but would forever alter how the world viewed women in combat aviation. This is the story of how one F-16 strike mission became the moment that rewrote military history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning briefing room at Shaw Air Force Base buzzed with the usual pre-mission energy as pilots shuffled through intelligence reports and weather updates. Captain Jessica Rodriguez sat in the back row, her flight helmet resting on the metal chair beside her, listening to Colonel Marcus Thompson outline the day's training exercises. At 28, Jessica had logged more simulator hours than most pilots saw in their first 3 years, but actual combat missions remained frustratingly out of reach. Around her, the 20th Fighter Squadron's pilots discussed their assignments with the casual confidence of aviators who'd never questioned their right to be there. Major Derek Sullivan, callsign Venom, commanded attention whenever he spoke, his combat experience from previous deployments giving weight to every tactical observation. Lieutenant Amy Chen, known as Phoenix to her squadron mates, took meticulous notes on target coordinates and threat assessments. These were pilots who'd earned their wings through skill and determination, but they'd never faced the additional burden of proving their gender belonged in the cockpit. Jessica had grown up on Air Force bases, the daughter of a career enlisted man who'd spent 30 years maintaining the very aircraft she now flew. While other children played video games, she'd memorized aircraft specifications and studied flight manuals. Her father, Staff Sergeant Roberto Rodriguez, had encouraged her dreams even when others suggested she consider more traditional career paths. By age 16, she could identify any NATO aircraft by sound alone and knew the performance characteristics of every fighter in the American inventory. Her path to the cockpit had been marked by constant scrutiny that her male counterparts never experienced. Flight school instructors had pushed her harder, tested her more frequently, and questioned her decisions with an intensity that bordered on harassment. Every mistake was magnified, every success attributed to luck or lowered standards. When she'd finally earned her wings and F-16 certification, some colleagues whispered that diversity quotas had played a role in her advancement. The reality was far different. Jessica had graduated third in her flight training class, posted exceptional scores on weapon systems evaluations, and demonstrated tactical thinking that impressed even skeptical instructors. Her academic background included degrees in aerospace engineering and military strategy, credentials that would have guaranteed respect for a male officer, but somehow seemed irrelevant when attached to her name. Despite her qualifications, she found herself assigned to training missions and homeland defense patrols, while her peers deployed to active combat zones. Colonel Thompson had been supportive, but realistic about the institutional barriers she faced. The Air Force was evolving, he'd explained, but change came slowly to organizations built on tradition and proven methods. Combat aviation remained dominated by men who'd earned their positions through demonstrated capability under fire, and until she could prove herself in actual warfare, questions about her readiness would persist. The frustration of being perpetually prepared, but never deployed, had begun to wear on Jessica's confidence. She watched squadron mates return from overseas assignments with combat ribbons and stories of successful missions while she continued flying the same training routes over South Carolina. Her logbook showed hundreds of hours of simulated combat time, perfect scores on weapons delivery exercises, and commendations for tactical innovation. But none of that seemed to matter when deployment orders were distributed. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, the squadron's senior maintenance chief, had become an unexpected ally in her quest for recognition. A grizzled veteran with 22 years of experience, Torres had initially been skeptical of female pilots, but had grown to respect Jessica's technical knowledge and dedication to aircraft systems. Unlike many pilots who viewed maintenance as someone else's responsibility, Jessica spent her off-duty hours learning about engine performance, avionics troubleshooting, and weapons systems integration. This attention to technical detail had earned Torres's grudging respect and eventually his advocacy. The breakthrough came during a routine training exercise that demonstrated Jessica's tactical capabilities in a way that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. The 20th Fighter Squadron was conducting dissimilar air combat training against Navy 18 pilots from a visiting squadron. The exercise called for complex air-to-air engagements that would test both dogfighting skills and beyond visual range. Tactics. Jessica had been assigned to a supporting role, providing electronic warfare coverage while the primary fighters engaged the Navy pilots. What happened during that exercise would later be studied in tactical schools as an example of innovative thinking under pressure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When the primary engagement began, the Navy pilots demonstrated superior coordination and quickly gained advantage over the Air Force fighters. Traditional doctrine called for the electronic warfare aircraft to remain at safe distance while providing support, but Jessica recognized an opportunity that others had missed. Using her F-16's agility and her deep understanding of radar signatures, she maneuvered into a position where she could simultaneously jam Navy targeting systems while setting up her own attack vectors. The move required split-second timing and precise aircraft control, as she had to coordinate her electronic countermeasures with her flight path to avoid detection while maintaining effectiveness. When she executed her attack, 3 Navy F-18s found themselves painted by targeting radars they couldn't detect or counter. The simulated kills she achieved that day weren't just tactical victories. They were proof of concept for entirely new approaches to electronic warfare. Her innovation had turned a support aircraft into a primary weapon system, demonstrating that creative thinking could overcome technological limitations. The Navy pilots, initially frustrated by their unexpected defeat, became some of her strongest advocates after understanding the tactical brilliance of her approach. Colonel Thompson's report on the exercise had reached Pentagon attention within weeks, leading to requests for detailed analysis of Jessica's tactics and recommendations for broader implementation. For the first time in her career, her gender seemed irrelevant compared to her demonstrated capability to revolutionize air combat doctrine. The woman who had been considered a liability by some colleagues had just proven she might be their greatest asset. Yet even as recognition for her tactical innovation grew, combat deployment remained elusive. The Air Force's institutional caution meant that proving herself in training was only the first step toward earning the opportunity to demonstrate her skills in actual warfare. Jessica continued her routine of training missions and simulator sessions, knowing that somewhere in the world, conflicts were developing that would eventually require the kind of innovative thinking she'd demonstrated. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October when global tensions had escalated beyond diplomatic solutions. A regional conflict in Eastern Europe had drawn NATO into peacekeeping operations, and American air power was being deployed to support ground forces facing a technologically sophisticated enemy. The 20th Fighter Squadron received deployment orders to Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates, where they would join a multinational force tasked with establishing air superiority over the contested region. Jessica's name appeared on the deployment roster, marking the first time she would fly combat missions in an active theater of operations. The assignment came with Colonel Thompson's personal endorsement and specific instructions that her electronic warfare innovations were considered essential to mission success. After years of preparation and frustration, she would finally have the opportunity to prove that her capabilities extended far beyond the training environment. The deployment to Al Dhafra represented more than just a career milestone. It was validation that the Air Force was beginning to recognize talent regardless of gender. Jessica packed her gear with the methodical precision she brought to every aspect of her military service, knowing that the missions ahead would determine not just her own future, but potentially influence policies affecting every woman who dreamed of flying combat aircraft. As her transport aircraft lifted off from Shaw Air Force Base, carrying her toward her first combat deployment, Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every challenge, every moment of doubt, every instance of having to prove herself had prepared her for whatever lay ahead. The woman who had been told she'd never fly combat was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful weapon in any conflict is the determination of someone who refuses to accept limitations imposed by others. The desert landscape of the Middle East stretched endlessly below as their transport approached Al Dhafra Air Base, but Jessica's thoughts were focused on the missions that awaited. Somewhere in the contested airspace over Eastern Europe, enemy forces were operating with confidence that American air power couldn't reach their most critical targets. They were about to learn that underestimating an opponent based on assumptions rather than capabilities was a mistake that could change the entire course of a war. Al Dhafra Air Base pulsed with the controlled chaos of a multinational military operation as Jessica Rodriguez stepped off the transport aircraft into the scorching desert heat. The sprawling facility housed aircraft from 6 different nations, each contributing their specialized capabilities to the coalition effort in Eastern Europe. American F-16 sat alongside British Typhoons, French Rafales, and German Tornadoes, creating an impressive display of Western air power. What none of her new squadron mates knew was that Jessica had spent the previous 3 years developing classified electronic warfare techniques that hadn't yet been shared with the broader pilot community. Her official records showed standard training progression and exceptional simulator scores, but buried in secure Pentagon files were technical reports detailing revolutionary approaches to modern air combat that she had pioneered during her seemingly routine assignments. At Shaw Air Force Base, the development of these techniques had begun during her 2nd year as a qualified F-16 pilot, when she'd been assigned to work with the Air Force's Electronic Warfare Development Center at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. What had been intended as a temporary duty assignment to support testing of new countermeasures equipment had evolved into an intensive research project that pushed the boundaries of what single-seat fighters could accomplish in electronic combat environments. Working with civilian defense contractors and Air Force research scientists, Jessica had discovered that the F-16's compact size and agile flight characteristics could be leveraged in ways that larger, more specialized electronic warfare aircraft couldn't match. Traditional electronic warfare platforms were powerful but predictable, following established flight patterns that enemy forces had learned to anticipate and counter. Jessica's innovation lay in developing techniques that used unpredictable flight paths and split-second timing to maximize electronic warfare effectiveness while minimizing vulnerability. The breakthrough had come during a late-night testing session, when she'd been experimenting with ways to coordinate her aircraft's electronic countermeasures with its physical movement through 3-dimensional space. Most pilots viewed electronic warfare as a static process, turning systems on and off according to predetermined procedures. Jessica had discovered that by constantly adjusting her aircraft's position, altitude, and heading in precise coordination with her electronic emissions, she could create confusion effects that were far more powerful than the sum of their individual components. Her technique required an intuitive understanding of electromagnetic propagation, enemy radar characteristics, and aircraft performance limits that few pilots possessed. The cognitive workload was enormous, demanding simultaneous management of flight controls, electronic systems, and tactical awareness at levels that pushed human capabilities to their limits. During testing, several experienced pilots had attempted to replicate her methods, but had been overwhelmed by the complexity of coordinating so many variables simultaneously. The classification of her work had meant that even her squadron mates at Shaw Air Force Base were unaware of her specialized capabilities. Official documentation referred to her temporary duties at Eglin as routine training assignments, while the actual nature of her work remained buried in compartmentalized intelligence files. This secrecy had contributed to the perception that she was merely another pilot awaiting her first combat deployment, rather than someone who had already revolutionized entire aspects of air warfare. Dr. Sarah Chen, the civilian scientist who had supervised much of Jessica's research work, had been amazed by the pilot's ability to translate theoretical electronic warfare concepts into practical flight techniques. Most military aviators, she had observed, were skilled at executing predetermined procedures, but struggled with the kind of innovative thinking required to develop entirely new approaches to combat problems. Jessica's combination of technical knowledge, flying skills, and creative problem-solving had made her uniquely capable of bridging the gap between laboratory theory and operational reality. The implications of Jessica's innovations extended far beyond individual pilot capabilities. Her techniques had the potential to restore advantages that American air power had been losing to increasingly sophisticated enemy air defense systems. Foreign nations had been developing countermeasures specifically designed to defeat traditional American electronic warfare approaches, but Jessica's methods were so fundamentally different that existing countermeasures were largely ineffective against them. Pentagon analysts had identified her innovations as potentially decisive factors in any major air campaign, but the political and institutional challenges of implementing such radical departures from established doctrine had delayed broader deployment of her techniques. The Air Force's natural conservatism meant that even proven innovations faced years of evaluation and gradual integration before becoming standard practice. Jessica's deployment to Al Dafra represented the first opportunity to test her methods in actual combat conditions. The scientific principles underlying her approach drew from chaos theory, quantum mechanics, and advanced signal processing concepts that were barely understood by most military personnel. Jessica had spent months studying these fields, working with university professors and defense industry researchers to develop mathematical models that could predict the effectiveness of her techniques under various combat conditions. Her personal library included advanced texts on electromagnetic theory, nonlinear dynamics, and information warfare that would have challenged graduate students in relevant fields. This deep theoretical knowledge was complemented by thousands of hours of practical experimentation in controlled testing environments. Jessica had flown more electronic warfare missions than any other F-16 pilot in the Air Force, though most of these flights had been classified as routine training rather than the groundbreaking research they actually represented. Her logbook showed standard pilot activities while omitting the revolutionary nature of the work she had been conducting. The psychological aspects of her innovations were equally sophisticated. Jessica had studied enemy pilot behavior patterns, analyzing how adversary aircrew responded to various types of electronic interference. She had discovered that human factors were often more important than technical capabilities in determining the effectiveness of electronic warfare operations. By understanding how enemy pilots thought and reacted under stress, she could tailor her electronic attacks to create maximum confusion and hesitation at critical moments. Her research had also revealed significant limitations in current American electronic warfare doctrine, which had been developed during an era when the United States possessed overwhelming technological advantages over potential adversaries. Modern enemy forces had closed many of these gaps, developing countermeasures that neutralized traditional American approaches. Jessica's methods represented a return to the kind of innovative thinking that had originally established American air superiority, adapting to new technological realities while leveraging fundamental advantages in pilot training and tactical flexibility. The classified nature of her work had created an unusual situation where Jessica possessed capabilities that were unknown even to her immediate superiors. Colonel Thompson knew that she had been involved in advanced research projects but was unaware of the specific nature of her innovations or their potential impact on combat operations. This information gap would prove significant as the squadron prepared for their first missions over Eastern Europe. The enemy forces they would be facing had been preparing for conflict with NATO air power for several years, developing integrated air defense systems that had successfully countered initial coalition airstrikes. Intelligence reports indicated that standard American electronic warfare techniques were proving less effective than anticipated, leading to higher than expected aircraft losses and mission failure rates. The coalition needed innovative approaches to overcome these defensive advantages, but military planners were unaware that one of their deployed pilots possessed exactly the capabilities required to change the tactical balance. Jessica's arrival at Al Dhafra had been processed as routine pilot rotation, with no special briefings or preparations that might have indicated her unique capabilities. She was assigned to standard quarters, given conventional mission briefings, and integrated into flight schedules that treated her as an inexperienced combat pilot requiring careful supervision. The disconnect between her actual capabilities and the squadron's perception of her abilities would soon create opportunities for the kind of tactical surprise that could alter the entire course of the conflict. Staff Sergeant Torres had accompanied the squadron deployment and immediately began preparing Jessica's assigned aircraft for combat operations. His experience working with her at Shaw Air Force Base had taught him to pay special attention to the electronic warfare systems installation, though he wasn't fully aware of why these systems were configured differently than standard F-16s. The modifications that had been made to support her research work remained installed, providing capabilities that would prove crucial in the missions ahead. As Jessica completed her initial briefings and settled into the rhythm of deployed operations, she began analyzing intelligence reports about enemy air defense capabilities with the trained eye of someone who understood electronic warfare at levels far beyond most military personnel. The patterns she identified in enemy radar deployments and communication intercepts revealed vulnerabilities that conventional analysis had missed, opportunities that her specialized techniques could exploit to devastating effect. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would demonstrate the true value of innovative thinking in modern warfare. Jessica Rodriguez carried within her mind the keys to overcoming enemy advantages that had frustrated coalition air operations for months, but institutional assumptions about her capabilities meant that this potential remained unrecognized by military planners, who desperately needed exactly what she could provide. The pressure campaign, the operational briefing room at Al Dhafra Air Base reflected the mounting frustration of coalition air commanders as they grappled with an enemy that had proven far more resilient than anticipated. Large displays showed current intelligence assessments of the Eastern European theater, where NATO ground forces were facing increasingly effective opposition from enemy air defenses that had successfully disrupted planned air support missions. General Patricia Hayes had arrived from the Pentagon the previous evening, bringing with her a sense of urgency that permeated every aspect of the base's operations. Her reputation as a no-nonsense officer who demanded results preceded her, and squadron commanders found themselves under intense pressure to develop solutions to tactical problems that had stumped air planners for weeks. The statistics painted a sobering picture of coalition air operations. Mission success rates had fallen to 63%, well below the levels required for effective close air support. Aircraft loss rates, while still manageable, were higher than projections had indicated, forcing commanders to husband their resources more carefully than originally planned. Most concerning was the enemy's demonstrated ability to adapt their defensive tactics faster than coalition forces could counter them. Jessica found herself attending briefings where senior officers discussed these challenges with increasing desperation. Traditional approaches to suppressing enemy air defenses had proven inadequate against an opponent who had spent years studying American tactics and developing specific countermeasures. The enemy's integrated air defense network combined sophisticated radar systems with mobile surface-to-air missile platforms that could relocate faster than intelligence could track them. Major Brad Johnson, the squadron's operations officer, had been tasked with developing new approaches to overcome these defensive advantages. His background included extensive experience with conventional electronic warfare operations, but the current situation demanded innovations that went beyond established doctrine. During planning sessions, he repeatedly emphasized the need for pilots to think creatively about ways to exploit enemy weaknesses. The pressure for results was intensified by political considerations that added urgency to military objectives. NATO's credibility was at stake in the Eastern European operation, and failure to achieve decisive results could undermine alliance cohesion for years to come. American air power was expected to provide the decisive advantage that would force enemy forces to abandon their defensive positions, but current performance levels were insufficient to achieve this goal. Colonel Thompson faced the difficult task of preparing his squadron for missions that required capabilities beyond their current training and equipment. Standard F-16 operations were well within his pilot's abilities, but the complex electronic warfare environment they were entering demanded skills that few American aviators possessed. The squadron's pre-deployment training had been thorough but had not anticipated the level of enemy sophistication they were now encountering. Intelligence briefings revealed that enemy forces had developed jamming techniques specifically designed to counter American electronic warfare systems. Traditional approaches that had been effective in previous conflicts were being neutralized by opponents who had studied American methods and developed targeted countermeasures. The technological advantages that American forces had historically relied upon were being systematically eroded by an enemy that refused to fight according to American expectations. The implications of these developments extended beyond individual mission success to the broader strategic objectives of the coalition operation. Ground forces were depending on air support that was becoming increasingly difficult to deliver effectively. Political leaders were demanding progress reports that military commanders found increasingly difficult to provide. The entire operational concept was under strain from enemy capabilities that had been underestimated during initial planning phases. Jessica observed these discussions with growing awareness that her specialized knowledge might be relevant to the challenges the squadron was facing. However, the classified nature of her background research made it impossible to contribute directly to planning sessions without proper authorization. She found herself in the frustrating position of recognizing potential solutions to problems that were consuming enormous amounts of command attention while being unable to share her insights. The daily routine of mission planning and execution was complicated by the need to constantly adapt to enemy countermeasures that appeared with surprising frequency. Tactics that had worked during previous missions were often ineffective just days later, forcing pilots to develop new approaches under time pressures that left little room for thorough testing. The enemy's ability to learn and adapt was proving to be one of their most significant advantages. Staff briefings increasingly focused on the need for tactical innovations that could restore American advantages in the electronic warfare environment. Senior officers stressed that conventional approaches were insufficient and that combat pilots needed to think beyond established procedures. The irony of this situation was not lost on Jessica, who possessed exactly the kind of innovative capabilities that commanders were desperately seeking. The psychological pressure on individual pilots was intensified by the knowledge that their performance was being closely monitored by senior leadership who were under pressure to justify the coalition's presence in Eastern Europe. Every mission was scrutinized for lessons learned and potential improvements, creating an atmosphere where mistakes were magnified and successes were attributed to luck rather than skill. Dr. Marcus Webb, a civilian defense contractor who had arrived to assess the effectiveness of current electronic warfare systems, added another layer of complexity to the operational environment. His analysis of mission results had led to recommendations for equipment modifications that would take weeks to implement, time that military commanders felt they couldn't afford given the urgency of current operations. The mismatch between available capabilities and mission requirements was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone involved in the operation. Standard American air combat doctrine assumed technological superiority that no longer existed in current conflict. Enemy forces had successfully negated many of the advantages that American pilots had been trained to exploit, forcing improvisation that was difficult to sustain over extended operations. Training schedules were modified to include additional electronic warfare instruction, but these efforts were hampered by the lack of realistic simulation environments that could replicate the sophisticated enemy capabilities being encountered. In actual combat, pilots were being asked to develop skills in operational environments that provided little margin for error, a situation that increased stress levels throughout the squadron. The command structure itself was under strain from the need to balance operational security requirements with the imperative to share tactical innovations that might improve mission effectiveness. Information that could help individual pilots perform their missions more effectively was often restricted by classification levels that prevented broader dissemination. This created inefficiencies that became more problematic as the pace of operations increased. Jessica's unique position as someone who possessed relevant classified knowledge while being treated as a standard pilot created opportunities and frustrations in roughly equal measure. She could see solutions to problems that were consuming enormous resources to solve through conventional approaches, but institutional barriers prevented her from contributing directly to the planning process. The woman who might hold keys to tactical success was constrained by the same security measures designed to protect the innovations she had developed. As the pressure for results continued to mount, the squadron found itself caught between competing demands for immediate tactical success and longer-term capability development. Senior leadership wanted solutions that could be implemented immediately, but the complex nature of modern electronic warfare made rapid adaptation extremely difficult using conventional approaches. The stage was being set for a confrontation between institutional expectations and tactical reality that would test the limits of both human capabilities and organizational flexibility. Jessica Rodriguez possessed knowledge and skills that could potentially alter the balance of the conflict, but accessing these capabilities would require overcoming barriers that the military establishment had created to protect its most sensitive secrets. The defiant choice, the Squadron Operations Center hummed with pre-mission activity as pilots reviewed target packages and weather updates for the day's sorties over Eastern Europe. Jessica Rodriguez sat at her assigned workstation, studying intelligence reports with the methodical precision that had become her trademark, but her mind was processing information through analytical frameworks that her colleagues didn't possess. Colonel Thompson's morning briefing had outlined another series of close air support missions designed to assist NATO ground forces facing determined enemy resistance. The tactical situation remained frustrating, with enemy air defenses continuing. To demonstrate effectiveness against coalition air operations that exceeded initial intelligence estimates, standard suppression techniques were producing marginal results, forcing ground commanders to operate without the level of air support that modern military doctrine assumed would be available. The breaking point came during a detailed mission planning session where Major Johnson outlined the specific challenges facing that day's operations. Enemy surface-to-air missile systems had been repositioned overnight, creating new threat corridors that would complicate aircraft ingress and egress routes. Intelligence indicated that enemy electronic warfare capabilities had been enhanced with equipment that could jam coalition communication and navigation systems with unprecedented effectiveness. Jessica listened to these briefings with growing certainty that her specialized knowledge could address many of the tactical problems that were consuming the squadron's planning resources. The enemy advantages that seemed so formidable to conventional analysis were precisely the types of challenges that her research had been designed to overcome. Her techniques for coordinating electronic warfare with unpredictable flight patterns could potentially neutralize the integrated air defense systems that had proven so troublesome for coalition forces. The decision to act came when she overheard Major Sullivan discussing mission abort criteria with other experienced pilots. Their conversation revealed the extent to which enemy electronic warfare capabilities were constraining coalition operations, forcing pilots to operate within parameters that significantly reduced their tactical effectiveness. The frustration in their voices reflected the broader challenge facing air operations that were essential to overall mission success. Jessica approached Colonel Thompson privately after the formal briefing session concluded, requesting a few minutes of his time to discuss operational matters that might be relevant to current mission planning. Her careful phrasing avoided specific references to classified programs, while indicating that she might possess insights that could prove valuable to squadron operations. The conversation that followed would later be cited as a pivotal moment in the development of modern air combat doctrine. Jessica explained, in carefully chosen terms that avoided revealing classified details, that her previous training assignments had included work with advanced electronic warfare techniques that might be applicable to current operational challenges. She emphasized her willingness to apply these methods in combat situations if command approval could be obtained. Colonel Thompson's initial reaction reflected the institutional caution that had characterized military approaches to tactical innovation throughout the conflict. Jessica's personnel files indicated standard pilot progression without reference to specialized capabilities that might justify the kind of operational flexibility she was requesting. Her combat experience consisted entirely of training missions and simulated exercises, hardly the foundation for implementing untested techniques in active warfare. However, the colonel's desperation for solutions to problems that had frustrated more experienced officers created openings for unconventional approaches that might normally have been dismissed without serious consideration. The squadron's mission success rates were below acceptable levels, and standard techniques had proven inadequate against enemy capabilities that continued to exceed intelligence predictions. His willingness to consider innovative approaches reflected the broader recognition that conventional methods were insufficient for current operational requirements. Jessica's presentation of her capabilities was masterfully crafted to provide enough detail to demonstrate serious knowledge while avoiding specific references that might violate security regulations. She described theoretical approaches to electronic warfare that could enhance mission effectiveness without revealing the classified research that had led to their development. Her technical vocabulary and understanding of complex electromagnetic principles impressed Thompson sufficiently to warrant further investigation. The colonel's decision to authorize limited implementation of Jessica's techniques represented a significant departure from standard operational procedures. Military aviation traditionally emphasized proven methods and gradual integration of innovations through extensive testing and evaluation processes. Combat environments were considered inappropriate venues for experimenting with unproven techniques that might jeopardize mission success or aircraft safety. Yet the tactical situation demanded exactly this kind of innovative thinking. Enemy forces had demonstrated their ability to counter standard American approaches faster than coalition forces could adapt their methods. The technological advantages that American military doctrine assumed were being systematically neutralized by opponents who refused to fight according to American expectations. Success would require the kind of tactical creativity that military institutions often discouraged in favor of procedural consistency. Jessica's request for modified mission parameters reflected her understanding that her techniques required operational flexibility that standard F-16 missions didn't typically provide. Her methods demanded the freedom to deviate from predetermined flight paths and coordination requirements that might conflict with her need to optimize electronic warfare effectiveness through unpredictable aircraft movement. These requirements represented significant departures from established safety and coordination protocols. The negotiation process that followed involved careful balancing of operational security requirements with the need to provide Jessica sufficient latitude to demonstrate her capabilities. Colonel Thompson had to authorize exceptions to standard procedures while maintaining overall mission integrity and safety standards. The compromise they reached would allow Jessica to implement her techniques within carefully defined parameters that minimized risks to other aircraft and mission objectives. Staff Sergeant Torres played a crucial role in preparing Jessica's aircraft for missions that would push both pilot and machine to their operational limits. His experience maintaining her F-16 during the research phases at Shaw Air Force Base had taught him to configure electronic warfare systems in ways that supported her unconventional techniques. The modifications required were subtle but essential to enabling the precise coordination between aircraft movement and electronic emissions that her methods demanded. The decision to proceed with operational testing of Jessica's innovations carried risks that extended beyond individual mission success to broader questions about the role of unproven techniques in combat environments. Military leaders were trained to minimize uncertainty and rely on methods with established track records of effectiveness. Jessica's approach represented exactly the kind of tactical experimentation that institutional culture generally discouraged. However, the strategic importance of the Eastern European operation created pressures that overwhelmed normal procedural constraints. NATO's credibility was at stake, and American air power was expected to provide decisive advantages that current operations were failing to deliver. The political implications of continued tactical frustration could undermine alliance relationships that had taken decades to develop. Jessica's confidence in her methods was based on extensive testing and theoretical analysis that had convinced civilian researchers of their potential effectiveness. However, translating laboratory success to combat environments involved variables that could only be evaluated through actual operational implementation. Her willingness to stake her career on the effectiveness of these techniques reflected both professional confidence and personal commitment to proving that innovative thinking could overcome institutional assumptions about capability and gender. The squadron's reaction to news that Jessica would be implementing experimental techniques in combat missions reflected the complex dynamics of military culture facing pressure to achieve results through unconventional means. Some pilots expressed skepticism about departing from proven methods, while others recognized that standard approaches had proven inadequate for current challenges. The woman who had been considered a liability by some colleagues was about to demonstrate whether innovative thinking could compensate for institutional disadvantages. As mission planning proceeded with Jessica's techniques integrated into operational parameters, the stage was set for a test of whether individual innovation could overcome systemic challenges that had frustrated coalition air operations for months. The defiant choice to implement unproven methods in combat environments would either vindicate years of research and development or demonstrate the dangers of departing from established military doctrine under pressure. The gauntlet thrown, the secure communications center at Al Dhafra Air Base crackled with encrypted transmissions as intelligence officers processed overnight developments from the Eastern European theater that would reshape the entire coalition. Air campaign. Enemy forces had consolidated their positions around the strategically critical Kronstadt International Bridge, creating a defensive complex that intelligence analysts described as the most sophisticated integrated air defense network encountered since the conflict began. General Hayes stood before the assembled squadron commanders and senior pilots, her expression reflecting the gravity of intelligence reports that had arrived during the early morning hours. Satellite imagery revealed that enemy forces had moved their most advanced surface-to-air missile systems into positions that created overlapping coverage zones, protecting the bridge complex. The installation represented more than just military infrastructure. Its destruction would cripple enemy supply lines and force a strategic withdrawal that could end the conflict within weeks. The bridge itself spanned a deep river gorge and mountainous terrain that created additional challenges for conventional air attack methods. Enemy engineers had positioned radar installations on surrounding peaks that provided early warning coverage, extending hundreds of miles in all directions. Mobile missile systems were dispersed throughout the valley in positions that could engage attacking aircraft from multiple vectors simultaneously. The defensive arrangement represented months of careful planning, designed specifically to counter American air attack capabilities. Major Johnson's intelligence briefing revealed the full scope of the challenge facing coalition air forces. Enemy electronic warfare systems had been concentrated around the bridge complex, creating jamming effects that would disrupt American navigation, communication, and targeting systems. Previous attempts to suppress these defenses using conventional methods had failed, with 2 F-16s suffering significant damage during reconnaissance missions that had barely escaped the defensive network. The political implications of the bridge's continued operation were becoming untenable for NATO leadership. Ground forces were facing increasing pressure from enemy units that were being resupplied through the bridge complex faster than coalition forces could interdict them. Intelligence indicated enemy morale was improving as their defensive success demonstrated that American air power could be effectively countered through proper preparation and tactical innovation. Coalition commanders had exhausted standard options for dealing with the integrated air defense system protecting the bridge. Cruise missile attacks had been attempted, but had been defeated by electronic countermeasures that spoofed guidance systems and caused weapons to miss their targets by significant margins. Conventional suppression missions had proven ineffective against mobile missile systems that could relocate faster than targeting data could be processed and transmitted to attacking aircraft. The mission parameters that General Hayes outlined represented the most challenging air combat assignment that any of the assembled pilots had encountered. A single F-16 would be required to penetrate the enemy defensive network, survive whatever electronic warfare and missile threats were encountered, and deliver a precision strike against the bridge structure itself. The attacking aircraft would operate without the electronic warfare support that had become standard for such missions, as enemy countermeasures had proven capable of neutralizing traditional support aircraft. Success would require tactical innovation that went beyond anything in current Air Force doctrine. The attacking pilot would need to overcome integrated defenses that had been specifically designed to defeat American air attack methods. Electronic warfare capabilities would be essential, but they would need to be employed in ways that enemy forces hadn't anticipated or prepared to counter. The mission would test the limits of both human capability and aircraft performance in an environment where margins for error were essentially non-existent. Jessica Rodriguez listened to these briefings with growing recognition that the challenge being described was precisely the type of scenario her research had been designed to address. The enemy's integrated air defense network represented exactly the kind of sophisticated threat that her electronic warfare innovations could potentially neutralize. Her techniques for coordinating unpredictable flight patterns with precisely timed electronic countermeasures had been developed specifically to overcome the type of defensive advantages that enemy forces were currently exploiting. The selection process for the mission pilot would be based on qualifications and capabilities that emphasized experience with complex electronic warfare environments. Standard criteria would favor pilots with extensive combat records and demonstrated proficiency with advanced systems integration. Jessica's personnel file, however, contained none of the combat experience that would normally qualify her for such a critical assignment. Colonel Thompson faced the difficult decision of recommending pilots for a mission that would determine the success or failure of the entire coalition operation. His squadron included several highly qualified aviators with combat experience that exceeded Jessica's simulated training background. Major Sullivan's record included successful missions against sophisticated air defense systems, while other pilots had demonstrated capabilities under combat conditions that Jessica had only encountered in training environments. Yet Thompson's recent conversations with Jessica had revealed capabilities that weren't reflected in her official records. Her understanding of electronic warfare principles and her confidence in discussing complex tactical scenarios suggested qualifications that transcended the standard metrics used to evaluate pilot readiness. The colonel found himself weighing institutional preferences for proven combat experience against the possibility that unconventional capabilities might be exactly what the mission required. The timeline for mission execution added urgency to the selection process that precluded extensive evaluation of alternative approaches. Intelligence indicated that enemy forces were continuing to strengthen their defensive positions around the bridge complex, making successful attacks increasingly difficult with each passing day. Political pressure from NATO headquarters demanded action within a time frame that left little room for the deliberate planning that such complex missions typically required. Dr. Webb's analysis of previous mission failures had identified specific technical challenges that standard American electronic warfare systems had proven unable to overcome. Enemy jamming techniques were operating on frequency ranges and using power levels that exceeded the capabilities of conventional countermeasures equipment. The attacking aircraft would need electronic warfare capabilities that went beyond anything currently deployed in operational squadrons. The irony of the situation was apparent to Jessica as she listened to technical discussions about requirements that her classified research had already addressed. The innovations she had developed during her work at Eglin Air Force Base were specifically designed to counter the types of electronic warfare threats that were protecting the bridge complex. Her techniques could potentially neutralize enemy advantages that had frustrated coalition air operations for weeks. However, the classified nature of her background meant that she couldn't advocate directly for her selection without revealing information that exceeded her authorization levels. She found herself in the position of possessing exactly the capabilities required for mission success while being unable to demonstrate these qualifications through conventional evaluation methods. The institutional barriers that had been created to protect sensitive research were now preventing the operational implementation of innovations that could determine the outcome of the entire conflict. The announcement of mission parameters created a competitive environment among squadron pilots who recognized the strategic importance of the bridge attack mission. Success would establish the pilot's reputation and potentially influence the broader course of the conflict. The challenge represented the type of high-stakes mission that defined military aviation careers and determined historical recognition for exceptional performance under pressure. Major Sullivan's experience with electronic warfare missions made him the apparent front-runner for selection, despite his previous difficulties with enemy countermeasures that had proven more sophisticated than anticipated. His combat record included successful attacks against integrated air defense systems, though none had approached the complexity of the current challenge. Other experienced pilots possessed qualifications that would normally guarantee consideration for such critical assignments. The selection process would ultimately be determined by Colonel Thompson's assessment of which pilot possessed the best combination of technical knowledge, tactical innovation, and psychological resilience required for a mission that would test the limits of human capability. Standard evaluation criteria emphasized proven performance under combat conditions, but the unique challenges of the bridge attack might require capabilities that transcended conventional measures of pilot qualification. As the briefing concluded, and pilots began discussing the technical challenges involved in penetrating the enemy defensive network, Jessica realized that the moment she had been preparing for throughout her career was finally at hand. The mission that could validate years of research and development would require her to overcome not only enemy defenses, but also institutional assumptions about her capabilities and qualifications for combat operations at the highest levels of tactical complexity. The squadron-ready room buzzed with speculation and disbelief as word spread through Al Dhafra Air Base that Captain Jessica Rodriguez had volunteered for the bridge strike mission. Pilots gathered around coffee stations and mission planning tables, their conversations carrying the mixture of incredulity and dark humor that characterized military reaction to decisions that defied conventional wisdom. Major Derek Sullivan leaned against the intelligence display board, shaking his head as he addressed a small group of experienced aviators who had been discussing the mission selection process. His voice carried the authority of someone who had survived multiple combat deployments and understood the realities of flying against sophisticated enemy defenses. The bridge attack represented the kind of mission that separated theoretical knowledge from practical survival skills, and Sullivan's experience had taught him to respect the difference. "She's got simulator time and training flights," Sullivan said, his tone reflecting genuine concern rather than malicious intent. "But this isn't a controlled exercise with predetermined parameters and safety observers. Enemy missile systems don't follow training protocols, and their electronic warfare specialists aren't programmed to provide learning opportunities. The bridge complex is defended by people who have spent months preparing to kill American pilots, and they've already proven they know how to do it effectively." Lieutenant Amy Chen had been listening to these discussions with growing discomfort, recognizing the gendered assumptions that were influencing her colleagues' assessments of Jessica's capabilities. Her own experience as one of the few women in the squadron had taught her to identify the subtle ways that institutional bias shaped perceptions of female competence in combat environments. The skepticism being expressed about Jessica's qualifications contained undertones that would never have been directed toward a male pilot with identical credentials. Captain Lisa Martinez, callsign Storm, represented another perspective on the situation that reflected the complex dynamics of military culture adapting to changing demographics. Her own combat experience included successful missions against integrated air defense systems, though none had approached the complexity of the current challenge. Martinez understood both the legitimate concerns about mission difficulty and the institutional resistance to recognizing female capabilities in combat aviation. The betting that began circulating through the base reflected the broader skepticism about Jessica's chances of mission success. Odds were being quoted that assumed the mission would result in either aircraft loss or mission failure, with variations that speculated about the specific manner in which disaster would unfold. The casual nature of these predictions revealed how thoroughly the military community had internalized assumptions about female limitations in high-stress combat environments. Staff Sergeant Torres found himself defending Jessica's capabilities in conversations with maintenance personnel who questioned whether she possessed the physical and psychological resilience required for missions that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their operational limits. His experience working with her during the research phases at Shaw Air Force Base had provided insights into her technical knowledge and dedication that weren't reflected in her official records, but explaining these observations without revealing classified information proved challenging. The squadron's intelligence officer had prepared briefing materials that emphasized the extreme difficulty of the bridge attack mission, using language that seemed designed to discourage overconfidence among pilots who might underestimate the challenges involved. Charts showing previous mission failure rates, enemy capability assessments, and casualty projections painted a sobering picture of what awaited whoever attempted to penetrate the defensive network protecting the target. Dr. Webb's technical analysis of enemy electronic warfare capabilities had been circulated among squadron personnel as part of their mission preparation, and the document's conclusions about American vulnerabilities had become focal points for discussions about Jessica's prospects for survival. The civilian contractor's assessment suggested that current American countermeasures were inadequate against enemy systems that had been specifically designed to defeat NATO air attack methods. These technical briefings provided objective foundations for subjective concerns about Jessica's readiness for a mission that would test the limits of American air combat capabilities. Pilots with extensive combat experience acknowledged that the bridge attack would challenge even the most qualified aviators, making Jessica's relative inexperience seem particularly problematic. The mission represented the kind of assignment that military culture traditionally reserved for its most proven performers. The psychological dimension of pre-mission speculation reflected deeper questions about the role of gender in combat effectiveness that military institutions had been grappling with for decades. Jessica's selection for the bridge attack forced confrontation with assumptions about physical strength, emotional resilience, and decision-making under extreme stress that had shaped military culture since its founding. Her success or failure would inevitably be interpreted through lenses that extended far beyond individual performance. Colonel Thompson found himself fielding questions from senior officers who expressed concern about the wisdom of assigning such a critical mission to a pilot whose combat experience consisted entirely of training exercises. The institutional pressure to ensure mission success created natural preferences for proven capabilities over theoretical potential, regardless of the gender dynamics that complicated these discussions. The colonel's decision to support Jessica's selection required him to defend choices that departed from established precedents. The operational security requirements surrounding Jessica's classified background created additional complications for discussions about her qualifications. Personnel who might have provided informed perspectives on her capabilities were constrained by security classifications that prevented them from sharing relevant information. This information gap allowed speculation and assumption to fill spaces that objective assessment might have occupied under different circumstances. Major Johnson's mission planning sessions had attracted observers from throughout the coalition command structure who wanted to understand how American air power intended to overcome defensive challenges that had frustrated previous attempts. The international attention added pressure to demonstrate American tactical innovation, while creating additional scrutiny of personnel selections that would reflect on broader NATO capabilities. The base's informal communication networks carried rumors and speculation that reflected the broader military community's struggle to integrate women into combat roles that had traditionally been male-dominated. Jessica's mission assignment became a focal point for debates about capability, standards, and institutional change that extended far beyond the specific tactical challenges of attacking the bridge complex. Fighter pilot culture had always included elements of competitive assessment and mutual evaluation that served important functions in maintaining unit cohesion and performance standards. However, These cultural mechanisms had evolved in environments where gender wasn't a significant variable, and their application to female aviators often revealed biases that participants didn't consciously recognize or intend. The technical complexity of the bridge attack mission provided legitimate foundations for concerns about pilot readiness that transcended gender considerations. Enemy defenses represented state-of-the-art integrated systems that had been optimized specifically to counter American air attack methods. The mission would require tactical innovation, technical proficiency, and psychological resilience at levels that challenged even the most experienced combat pilots. Yet the manner in which these legitimate concerns were being expressed often revealed underlying assumptions about female capabilities that influenced assessment criteria in subtle but significant ways. Jessica's qualifications were being evaluated through frameworks that emphasized traditional measures of combat readiness while discounting alternative indicators of competence that might have provided more accurate predictions of mission performance. The international media attention that had begun focusing on the Eastern European conflict added another layer of complexity to discussions about Jessica's mission assignment. Her selection for such a high-profile operation would inevitably attract scrutiny that extended beyond military effectiveness to broader questions about women in combat roles. The political implications of mission success or failure would extend far beyond tactical considerations. Intelligence reports about enemy propaganda efforts had identified American female combat personnel as specific targets for psychological warfare campaigns designed to undermine coalition morale and cohesion. Jessica's participation in the bridge attack would provide enemy forces with opportunities to exploit cultural assumptions about gender roles that could influence public opinion in ways that affected political support for the entire operation. The squadron's younger pilots, many of whom had been trained in environments where female participation was more normalized, generally expressed less skepticism about Jessica's capabilities than their more experienced colleagues. This generational difference reflected broader cultural changes that were gradually influencing military attitudes, though institutional momentum still favored traditional approaches to personnel assignment and capability assessment. Combat veterans who had served alongside competent female personnel in previous conflicts provided more nuanced perspectives on gender-related performance questions, but their voices were often overshadowed by louder expressions of skepticism from personnel whose experience had been limited to male-dominated environments. The debate about Jessica's readiness became a proxy for larger conversations about institutional change and cultural adaptation. As mission preparation continued and speculation about outcomes intensified, Jessica found herself operating in an environment where every aspect of her performance was being scrutinized for evidence that would confirm or challenge pre-existing assumptions about her capabilities. The pressure of representing not just individual competence, but broader questions about female integration into combat roles added psychological burdens that her male colleagues had never experienced. The ridicule and skepticism that surrounded her mission assignment reflected institutional cultures that had evolved over decades of male-dominated operations, but were now being forced to adapt to changing demographics and political requirements. Jessica's bridge attack mission would provide a test case for these cultural adaptations that would influence military policies and attitudes for years to come. The preparation phase, the pre-dawn hours at Al Dhafra Air Base, took on an almost ceremonial quality as Jessica Rodriguez began the most intensive mission preparation of her career. While most of the base slept, she moved through the quiet corridors toward the secure planning facility where classified materials and specialized equipment awaited her review. The bridge attack mission demanded preparation that went far beyond standard pre-flight procedures, requiring integration of technical knowledge, tactical innovation, and psychological readiness at levels that few military operations ever approached. Staff Sergeant Torres had arrived even earlier, conducting detailed inspections of Jessica's assigned F-16 that reflected his understanding of the unique demands her mission would place on both aircraft and pilot. His methodical approach to systems verification incorporated lessons learned from their previous work together, though the current operational environment required modifications and calibrations that pushed beyond anything they had attempted during the research phases at Shaw Air Force Base. The electronic warfare systems installed in Jessica's aircraft represented the culmination of years of development work that had remained largely theoretical until the current conflict demanded practical implementation. Torres worked with precision that reflected both technical expertise and personal investment in ensuring that every component functioned perfectly under the extreme conditions that the mission would create. His modifications to standard configurations incorporated insights that had emerged from Jessica's innovative research but had never been tested in actual combat environments. Jessica's approach to mission planning revealed the depth of preparation that her unconventional background had provided for exactly this type of challenge. While other pilots might have focused primarily on flight path optimization and weapons delivery procedures, she was integrating electromagnetic propagation models, enemy radar characteristics, and aircraft performance parameters into comprehensive, tactical frameworks that accounted for variables most aviators never considered. The classified intelligence materials available to her contained detailed assessments of enemy capabilities that painted a sobering picture of the defensive network protecting the bridge complex. Electronic warfare systems positioned throughout the valley could generate jamming effects that would disrupt every aspect of normal aircraft operations, from navigation and communication to weapons targeting and flight control. The integrated nature of these defenses meant that countering one system would trigger responses from others that could create cascading failures in aircraft systems. Her analysis of enemy radar deployments revealed patterns that conventional intelligence assessment had missed, opportunities for exploitation that required precisely timed coordination between aircraft, movement, and electronic countermeasures. The enemy's sophisticated defensive network actually contained vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone who understood both the technical principles underlying radar operations and the tactical implications of three-dimensional movement. Through electromagnetic environments, the mathematical models Jessica had developed during her research work provided frameworks for predicting the effectiveness of her techniques under the specific conditions she would encounter over the bridge complex. Computer simulations running on classified systems showed promising results, but the transition from theoretical success to operational reality involved variables that could only be evaluated through actual implementation under combat conditions. Physical preparation for the mission required conditioning that went beyond standard pilot fitness requirements. Jessica's techniques demanded sustained high-G maneuvering combined with precise coordination of multiple aircraft systems under extreme stress conditions. The cognitive workload would approach the limits of human capability, requiring mental preparation that incorporated meditation techniques, stress management, and cognitive exercises designed to maintain performance under pressure. Lieutenant Chen had volunteered to assist with mission preparation activities that didn't require security clearances, providing support that reflected both professional competence and personal solidarity. Her experience as one of the few women in operational squadrons had taught her to recognize the additional pressures that female aviators faced in high-visibility assignments, and her assistance represented acknowledgement of challenges that male pilots rarely encountered. The weather analysis for the mission window revealed atmospheric conditions that would both complicate and facilitate different aspects of the attack profile. Cloud formations could provide concealment during certain phases of the approach, but would also affect electromagnetic propagation in ways that influenced the effectiveness of both enemy defenses and Jessica's countermeasures. Wind patterns at various altitudes would affect flight path optimization, and weapons delivery accuracy in ways that required constant recalculation of tactical parameters. Dr. Sarah Chun, the civilian scientist who had supervised much of Jessica's original research, had been granted special authorization to provide technical consultation for mission preparation. Her presence at Al Dhafra represented unprecedented civilian involvement in operational planning, but the unique nature of the techniques being employed demanded expertise that wasn't available through normal military channels. The technical briefings that Dr. Chun provided revealed the full complexity of the electromagnetic environment that Jessica would be operating within during the bridge attack. Enemy jamming systems would create interference patterns that could disrupt aircraft systems in ways that pilots had never encountered during training. The countermeasures that Jessica had developed were designed to exploit weaknesses in these jamming techniques, but their effectiveness would depend on split-second timing and precision that left no margin for error. Mission rehearsals conducted in high-fidelity simulators provided opportunities to practice coordination between flight controls and electronic warfare systems under conditions that approximated the stress and complexity of actual combat. However, the classified nature of Jessica's techniques meant that simulation software had to be modified to incorporate her innovations, creating additional complexity in preparation activities that were already approaching the limits of available time and resources. The psychological preparation required for the mission involved confronting not only the normal stresses associated with high-risk combat operations, but also the additional pressures created by institutional skepticism and media attention. Jessica worked with military psychologists who specialized in performance optimization under extreme conditions, developing mental preparation techniques that would help maintain focus and decision-making capability regardless of external pressures or unexpected complications. Intelligence updates continued to arrive throughout the preparation period, revealing enemy adaptations and improvements to defensive systems that complicated mission planning. The dynamic nature of the tactical environment meant that preparation had to incorporate flexibility and contingency planning for scenarios that couldn't be fully anticipated in advance. Jessica's techniques were inherently adaptable, but implementing them successfully would require real-time decision-making under conditions where mistakes could prove fatal. The weapons configuration for Jessica's F-16 had been optimized specifically for the bridge attack mission, incorporating precision-guided munitions that could deliver the destructive effects required while minimizing the time spent in the target area. The integration of weapons systems with electronic warfare equipment required careful balancing of weight, power consumption, and electromagnetic compatibility considerations that pushed aircraft performance to its limits. Coordination with supporting elements of the mission required communication protocols that preserved operational security while ensuring that rescue and recovery assets would be positioned to assist if the attack resulted in aircraft damage or pilot ejection. The isolated location of the bridge complex meant that survival and evasion scenarios would be particularly challenging, adding another layer of complexity to mission preparation activities. The cultural significance of Jessica's mission assignment had attracted attention from senior military leaders who recognized that her performance would influence policies and attitudes that extended far beyond individual career considerations. This additional scrutiny created pressure that could affect performance if not properly managed through psychological preparation techniques that helped maintain focus on tactical objectives rather than broader implications. As the mission date approached, Jessica's preparation activities intensified to include final systems checks, communications verification, and coordination with intelligence assets that would provide real-time updates about enemy activities during the attack window. The complexity of these preparations reflected both the technical demands of the mission and the institutional recognition that success or failure would have consequences that extended throughout the military establishment. The final briefing session brought together all personnel involved in mission support, from maintenance technicians to intelligence analysts to rescue coordinators. The comprehensive nature of these preparations reflected the military's commitment to providing every possible advantage to ensure mission success, while also acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the tactical approaches that Jessica would be implementing. The confrontation begins. The pre-dawn darkness at Al Dhafra Air Base was broken by the distinctive whine of F-16 engines as Jessica Rodriguez completed her final systems checks before the most critical mission of her career. The bridge attack represented not just a tactical objective, but a test of innovations that could reshape air combat doctrine for decades to come. As she settled into the cockpit that had become as familiar as her own apartment, Jessica felt the weight of expectations and skepticism that had followed her selection for this assignment. The electronic warfare systems that Staff Sergeant Torres had carefully calibrated hummed to life with precision that reflected months of preparation and modification. Unlike standard F-16 configurations, Jessica's aircraft incorporated capabilities that existed nowhere else in the Air Force inventory, innovations that remained classified at levels that prevented broader implementation despite their potential strategic value. The responsibility of proving these techniques in actual combat conditions added psychological pressure that complemented the natural stress of flying into one of the most heavily defended target areas in the current conflict. Radio communications with the base control tower followed standard departure procedures, but Jessica was acutely aware that every aspect of her mission was being monitored by personnel who had expressed varying degrees of confidence in her prospects for success. The skepticism that had surrounded her selection for the bridge attack created an atmosphere where mission failure would confirm institutional assumptions about female limitations in high-stress combat environments, while success would be attributed to luck rather than competence. The initial phase of her flight plan called for low-altitude navigation through terrain that would provide concealment from enemy early warning radars while she approached the contested airspace surrounding the bridge complex. This portion of the mission required precise coordination between aircraft performance and navigation systems that had been modified to operate effectively despite the electronic warfare environment she would soon be entering. As Jessica climbed to her planned cruising altitude, the familiar landscape of the Middle East gave way to the more challenging terrain of Eastern Europe, where enemy forces had been preparing defensive positions for months. Intelligence reports had identified radar installations and missile sites throughout the region, creating overlapping coverage zones that had successfully engaged previous coalition aircraft with effectiveness that exceeded initial threat assessments. The first indication of enemy electronic warfare capabilities came as Jessica approached the outer boundaries of the contested airspace, when her navigation systems began experiencing interference that standard American countermeasures had proven unable to overcome. The jamming techniques being employed were more sophisticated than anything encountered during her training, requiring immediate implementation of the specialized procedures she had developed during her classified research work. Jessica's response to the initial enemy electronic attacks demonstrated the fundamental difference between her approach and standard Air Force doctrine. Rather than attempting to overcome the jamming through brute force electronic countermeasures, she began implementing the coordinated flight path modifications that turned enemy jamming into tactical advantages. Her aircraft's movement through three-dimensional space was precisely calculated to exploit weaknesses in enemy electronic warfare systems that conventional pilots had never been trained to recognize. The cognitive workload required to simultaneously manage aircraft control, electronic warfare systems, and tactical awareness under these conditions approached the limits of human capability. Jessica's years of preparation had developed mental frameworks that allowed her to process multiple streams of information while maintaining the split-second decision-making capability that her techniques demanded. The integration of these skills represented innovations in human-machine interface that had emerged from her research but had never been tested under actual combat stress. Enemy air defense systems began tracking her aircraft as she penetrated deeper into contested airspace, their radar signatures appearing on her threat warning displays with intensity that indicated preparation for missile engagement. Standard doctrine called for evasive maneuvering and deployment of countermeasures that had proven effective in previous conflicts. But Jessica recognized that conventional responses would trigger defensive reactions that could overwhelm her aircraft's protective systems. Instead, she began implementing the unpredictable flight patterns that her research had identified as most effective against integrated air defense networks. Her F-16's movement became a carefully orchestrated dance that appeared random to enemy tracking systems while actually following mathematical models that maximize her electronic warfare effectiveness. The enemy's sophisticated defensive network, designed to counter predictable American attack methods, found itself struggling to maintain targeting solutions against an aircraft that refused to behave according to established patterns. The first surface-to-air missiles launched against Jessica's aircraft created the kind of life-threatening situation that had destroyed or damaged previous coalition fighters attempting to penetrate the bridge complex's defenses. Standard evasive procedures called for predetermined maneuvers designed to defeat missile guidance systems through kinetic effects. But Jessica's approach integrated electronic countermeasures with flight path optimization in ways that created confusion effects far more powerful than either technique could achieve independently. Her success in defeating the initial missile engagement demonstrated the effectiveness of techniques that had existed only in theoretical form until this moment. The missiles that should have destroyed her aircraft were defeated through combinations of electronic warfare and aircraft maneuvering that enemy forces had never encountered. The integrated air defense network that had proven so effective against previous American attacks suddenly found itself facing capabilities that their designers had never anticipated. However, the enemy's response to Jessica's unconventional tactics revealed the adaptive capabilities that had made them such formidable opponents throughout the conflict. Rather than continuing to employ standard engagement procedures that Jessica's techniques were specifically designed to counter, enemy air defense operators began implementing modifications to their systems that attempted to overcome her electronic warfare advantages through brute force approaches that relied on power rather than sophistication. The escalating electronic warfare environment created conditions that pushed both Jessica and her aircraft toward their operational limits. The power requirements for her countermeasure systems were approaching maximum sustainable levels, while the cognitive demands of coordinating multiple defensive responses under constant threat were testing the psychological preparation that had been such a crucial component of her mission readiness. Intelligence reports had indicated that enemy forces possessed backup defensive systems that could be activated if their primary networks proved inadequate against American attack methods. As Jessica continued to penetrate toward the bridge complex, these secondary systems began coming online, creating additional layers of complexity that hadn't been fully anticipated during mission planning phases. The mountainous terrain surrounding the bridge created radar shadows and electromagnetic interference patterns that both complicated enemy tracking efforts and reduced the effectiveness of some of Jessica's countermeasures. The three-dimensional nature of the engagement environment required constant recalculation of optimal flight paths and electronic warfare parameters, adding computational complexity to an already demanding tactical situation. Communications with Al Dhafra Air Base became increasingly difficult as enemy jamming systems attempted to disrupt coalition coordination and command functions. Standard communication procedures proved inadequate for maintaining contact under these conditions, forcing Jessica to rely on backup systems that provided only intermittent connectivity with mission controllers who were monitoring her progress with growing concern. The psychological pressure of operating in complete isolation while facing threats that had defeated previous American aircraft created stress levels that tested the mental preparation techniques Jessica had developed during her training. The knowledge that mission success or failure would influence not just tactical outcomes, but broader questions about female combat effectiveness, added emotional burdens that male pilots had never experienced under similar circumstances. As Jessica approached the final approach phase toward the bridge complex, the full capabilities of the enemy defensive network became apparent. Multiple missile systems were tracking her aircraft simultaneously, while electronic warfare systems attempted to disrupt every aspect of her aircraft's operation. The confrontation that was about to unfold would determine whether innovative thinking and unconventional tactics could overcome defensive advantages that had frustrated coalition air operations for months. The stage was set for a climactic engagement that would test the limits of both human capability and technological innovation against an enemy that had proven their ability to adapt and survive against conventional American air power. Jessica Rodriguez was about to discover whether years of research and preparation would prove sufficient to overcome challenges that had defeated every previous attempt to destroy the bridge that represented the key to ending the entire conflict. The electromagnetic chaos surrounding the Kronstadt International Bridge reached crescendo levels as Jessica Rodriguez maneuvered her F-16 through defensive fire that should have been impossible to survive. Multiple surface-to-air missiles streaked past her aircraft, while radar-guided artillery systems tracked her movement with precision that demonstrated the sophistication of enemy defensive preparations. Yet something extraordinary was happening in the contested airspace above the bridge complex that would fundamentally alter military understanding of modern air combat. Jessica's unconventional flight patterns had begun creating interference effects in the enemy's integrated air defense network that their designers had never anticipated. Her precisely coordinated movements were generating electromagnetic shadows and reflection patterns that confused targeting radars, while simultaneously creating opportunities for her own weapons systems to achieve lock-on solutions. The mathematical models she had developed during years of classified research were translating into tactical advantages that no amount of theoretical analysis could have fully predicted. Enemy air defense operators found themselves facing phenomena that contradicted their training and experience. Targeting systems that had successfully engaged previous American aircraft were producing inconsistent data that made accurate missile guidance impossible. The integrated network that had been optimized to counter conventional attack methods was discovering that its sophisticated sensors could be turned against themselves by someone who understood both their capabilities and their limitations. The breakthrough moment came when Jessica executed a maneuver that combined vertical climbing with precisely timed electronic countermeasures, creating a signature that appeared on enemy radar screens as multiple aircraft approaching from different vectors simultaneously. The confusion this generated in the defensive network created a brief window of vulnerability that she exploited with devastating effectiveness, launching her precision-guided weapons against the bridge structure while enemy missile systems were still attempting to resolve the targeting conflicts her maneuver had created. The explosion that followed marked more than just the destruction of critical enemy infrastructure. It represented validation of tactical innovations that challenged fundamental assumptions about air combat in electronic warfare environments. Jessica's success against defenses that had frustrated coalition air operations for months demonstrated that conventional approaches to modern warfare might be missing essential elements that could determine victory or defeat in future conflicts. Ground-based observers witnessed the bridge collapse with shock that reflected both the strategic importance of the target and the apparent impossibility of the attack that had just seeded. Intelligence analysts who had assessed the defensive network as impenetrable were forced to reconsider their understanding of both enemy capabilities and American potential for tactical innovation. The woman who had been dismissed as inexperienced had just accomplished what seasoned combat veterans had been unable to achieve. Real-time communications intercepts revealed the confusion and disbelief among enemy forces as they attempted to understand how their most heavily defended position had been successfully attacked by a single aircraft. Their electronic warfare specialists were reporting system malfunctions and sensor anomalies that suggested equipment failures rather than tactical defeat, unable to comprehend that their sophisticated defenses had been overcome through methods they had never encountered. The secondary explosions that followed the initial bridge collapse indicated that Jessica's precision strike had triggered sympathetic detonations in enemy ammunition storage areas that intelligence had not previously identified. The destruction extended beyond the bridge itself to include supply depots and defensive positions that would significantly complicate enemy efforts to establish alternative supply routes through the mountainous terrain. As Jessica's F-16 climbed away from the target area, her aircraft systems recorded data that would be analyzed by military researchers for years to come. The electromagnetic signatures captured during her attack provided unprecedented insights into enemy defensive capabilities while demonstrating the effectiveness of techniques that had existed only in theoretical form until this moment. Her mission represented a real-world laboratory experiment that had validated innovations with potential to revolutionize air combat doctrine. The immediate tactical implications of the bridge destruction became apparent as enemy ground forces began receiving reports that their primary supply line had been severed. Intelligence intercepts revealed confusion and concern among enemy commanders, who had considered the bridge invulnerable to air attack. The psychological impact of losing their most heavily defended position would ripple through enemy ranks with effects that extended far beyond the immediate logistical disruption. Enemy air defense systems continued tracking Jessica's aircraft as she departed the target area, but their attempts to engage her during the withdrawal phase proved even less effective than their initial defensive efforts. Her techniques for coordinating electronic warfare with evasive maneuvering had improved throughout the mission as she adapted to enemy capabilities in real time, demonstrating the kind of tactical flexibility that had always been hallmarks of superior military aviation. Coalition intelligence assets monitoring the mission provided real-time confirmation of target destruction that exceeded all expectations for damage assessment. Satellite imagery revealed that the bridge structure had collapsed completely, while secondary fires indicated that associated infrastructure had been significantly damaged. The strategic objectives that had seemed impossible to achieve through conventional air attacks had been accomplished through innovations that challenged established military doctrine. The flight data recorded by Jessica's aircraft revealed G-force patterns and electromagnetic exposure levels that approached the limits of both human endurance and equipment design specifications. Her success had required pushing both pilot and machine to performance levels that conventional training programs rarely attempted to replicate. The physical and mental demands of her techniques raised questions about the broader applicability of methods that demanded such exceptional individual capabilities. Communications with Al Dhafra Air Base restored as Jessica departed the heavy electronic warfare environment surrounding the bridge complex, allowing mission controllers to receive their first direct confirmation of target destruction. The relief and amazement evident in radio transmissions reflected the broader recognition that something unprecedented had just occurred in the contested airspace over Eastern Europe. Dr. Sarah Chen, monitoring the mission from the Secure Communications Center, observed electromagnetic signatures that confirmed the effectiveness of theoretical models she had helped develop during Jessica's research phases. The transition from laboratory simulation to operational reality had validated scientific principles while demonstrating that human factors remained crucial variables in determining the success of even the most sophisticated technical innovations. Staff Sergeant Torres tracked his pilot's return flight with the satisfaction of someone whose technical expertise had contributed to historic success. His modifications to Jessica's aircraft had performed flawlessly under conditions that would have overwhelmed standard F-16 configurations, proving that innovative maintenance approaches could be as important as pilot skills in determining mission outcomes. The strategic implications of Jessica's success extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation to fundamental questions about American air power capabilities in contested environments. Her demonstration that sophisticated enemy defenses could be overcome through innovative thinking rather than technological superiority suggested that properly trained and equipped pilots might possess advantages that had been underestimated by both allies and adversaries. Intelligence reports began indicating that enemy forces throughout the region were receiving orders to reassess their defensive preparations in light of the unexpected American capability that had just been demonstrated. The success of Jessica's mission was creating uncertainty among enemy planners who had considered their integrated air defense networks adequate protection against coalition air attacks. As Jessica's F-16 approached Al Dhafra Air Base for landing, ground personnel prepared to welcome back a pilot whose mission had exceeded every expectation and challenged every assumption about the relationship between experience, innovation, and combat effectiveness. The woman who had volunteered for an impossible mission was returning as proof that impossible was often just another word for unprecedented. The domination, the secure debriefing facility at Al Dhafra Air Base, filled with an unprecedented gathering of military officials, intelligence analysts, and technical specialists as Jessica Rodriguez completed the most successful mission in the Eastern European conflict to date. Her destruction of the Kronstadt International Bridge had exceeded every tactical objective while demonstrating capabilities that fundamentally challenged established understanding of modern air combat effectiveness. General Patricia Hayes arrived within hours of mission completion, bringing with her a team of Pentagon analysts who had been tracking the implications of Jessica's success for broader military strategy and doctrine development. The bridge attack had not only achieved its immediate objectives, but had demonstrated American technological and tactical advantages that intelligence agencies had been unaware existed within current operational capabilities. The mission data download from Jessica's F-16 revealed electromagnetic signatures and performance parameters that astonished even the civilian scientists who had helped develop her techniques during the research phases. The transition from theoretical possibility to operational reality had produced results that exceeded computer modeling predictions while validating scientific principles that had remained largely untested under actual combat conditions. Dr. Marcus Webb, who had previously expressed skepticism about unconventional approaches to electronic warfare, found himself reviewing data that contradicted his fundamental assumptions about the limitations of single aircraft operations in contested airspace. Jessica's success had been achieved using methods that his analysis had dismissed as impractical for operational implementation, forcing reconsideration of theoretical frameworks that had influenced military planning for years. The strategic impact of the bridge destruction became apparent within hours as intelligence reports revealed widespread disruption of enemy supply operations throughout the Eastern European theater. Ground forces that had been receiving consistent resupply through the bridge complex were suddenly isolated from their logistical support networks, creating vulnerabilities that coalition forces could exploit to achieve decisive tactical advantages. Enemy communications intercepts provided insights into the psychological impact of Jessica's success on adversary morale and strategic planning. Their confidence in integrated air defense systems had been shattered by the demonstration that sophisticated defensive networks could be penetrated and defeated by properly employed American air power. The fear and uncertainty evident in intercepted conversations suggested that enemy forces were reassessing their entire approach to defensive operations. Coalition partners who had been observing American air operations with growing concern about effectiveness against sophisticated enemy defenses suddenly found themselves requesting detailed briefings about the techniques that had enabled Jessica's unprecedented success. NATO commanders recognized that her innovations represented potential solutions to tactical problems that had been limiting the effectiveness of multinational air operations. The technical analysis conducted by Air Force electronic warfare specialists revealed that Jessica's methods had achieved suppression effects against enemy radar systems that were several orders of magnitude more effective than conventional jamming techniques. Her approach to coordinating aircraft movement with electronic countermeasures had created interference patterns that enemy designers had never anticipated when developing their defensive systems. Intelligence assessments indicated that enemy forces were already beginning to modify their air defense procedures in attempts to counter the American capabilities that Jessica had demonstrated. However, the fundamental nature of her innovations meant that simple procedural changes would be insufficient to restore the defensive advantages that enemy forces had previously enjoyed. The implications for pilot training programs became immediately apparent as military educators recognized that Jessica's success had been enabled by knowledge and skills that weren't included in current Air Force curricula. Her background in advanced mathematics, electromagnetic theory, and nonlinear dynamics had provided cognitive frameworks that allowed her to develop and implement innovations that conventionally trained pilots couldn't replicate. Dr. Sarah Chun's analysis of mission data revealed that Jessica's techniques had achieved performance levels that approached theoretical maximum effectiveness for the electromagnetic environment she had operated within. The precision of her coordination between aircraft movement and electronic warfare systems had created synergistic effects that multiplied the individual capabilities of both elements beyond what additive models had predicted possible. Staff Sergeant Torres's detailed examination of aircraft systems after mission completion showed that Jessica's F-16 had operated at performance levels that pushed both engines and avionics to their design limits while maintaining reliability that enabled mission success. His modifications to support her unconventional techniques had proven crucial to achieving the precision required for her methods to work effectively under combat conditions. The broader implications for Air Force doctrine became apparent as senior officers recognized that Jessica's success challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between pilot experience and combat effectiveness. Her ability to achieve results that had eluded more experienced aviators suggested that different types of preparation and knowledge might be more important than traditional measures of readiness for modern air combat environments. International media coverage of the bridge attack began focusing attention on the tactical innovations that had enabled American success against previously impenetrable enemy defenses. Military analysts from allied nations requested access to information about American electronic warfare capabilities that had demonstrated such unexpected effectiveness against sophisticated adversary systems. The enemy's response to their defensive failure revealed the extent to which Jessica's success had disrupted their strategic planning and operational confidence. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy commanders were questioning the reliability of defensive systems that had been central to their overall military strategy, creating opportunities for coalition forces to exploit the psychological advantages that tactical surprise had created. Pentagon officials recognized that Jessica's mission represented more than just tactical success. It demonstrated the potential for individual innovation to achieve strategic effects that conventional approaches had been unable to accomplish. Her techniques offered possibilities for air power employment that could alter the balance of future conflicts in favor of forces capable of implementing similar innovations. The scientific community's reaction to Jessica's success reflected recognition that her achievements had validated theoretical principles while demonstrating practical applications that had previously existed only in academic research. The transition from laboratory models to operational effectiveness had proven that advanced scientific knowledge could be translated into military advantages through proper integration with pilot training and aircraft capabilities. Coalition ground forces reported immediate improvements in their tactical situation as enemy resistance began collapsing, following the loss of supply lines that the bridge had provided. The strategic objectives that had seemed impossible to achieve through conventional military operations were suddenly within reach as a result of Jessica's successful demonstration of innovative air power employment. The transformation of military understanding that resulted from Jessica's mission would influence doctrine development, training programs, and equipment procurement decisions for decades to come. Her success had proven that the most advanced weapon system in any conflict remained the properly trained and equipped human being capable of innovative thinking under pressure. As intelligence analysts continued processing the implications of Jessica's achievement, the recognition grew that her mission had marked a turning point not just in the Eastern European conflict, but in the broader evolution of air warfare. Woman, who had been dismissed as inexperienced, had just demonstrated that experience might be less important than the ability to think beyond conventional limitations. The reckoning, the immediate aftermath of Jessica Rodriguez's impossible mission success created shockwaves throughout the coalition command structure that extended far beyond the tactical implications of destroying the Kronstadt International Bridge. Senior military officials who had expressed skepticism about her capabilities found themselves confronting evidence that challenged their fundamental assumptions about combat readiness, pilot qualification standards, and the role of innovative thinking in modern warfare. Major Derek Sullivan stood in the squadron-ready room, staring at mission telemetry data that documented performance levels he had never seen achieved by any pilot in his extensive combat experience. The electromagnetic warfare techniques that Jessica had employed were so far beyond conventional approaches that he struggled to understand how they had been developed, much less implemented successfully under the extreme stress of actual combat conditions. His previous confidence in traditional measures of pilot competence had been shattered by Jessica's demonstration that unconventional knowledge and innovative thinking could overcome defensive challenges that had defeated more experienced aviators. The woman he had dismissed as inadequately prepared had just accomplished what he and other seasoned combat pilots had been unable to achieve despite their superior records and conventional qualifications. Colonel Marcus Thompson faced the uncomfortable task of explaining to his superiors how a pilot with minimal combat experience had succeeded where others had failed, while simultaneously defending his decision to support her mission assignment. Despite institutional pressure to select more conventionally qualified personnel, Jessica's success had vindicated his judgment, but had also revealed the extent to which military culture had been undervaluing potential contributions from personnel who didn't fit traditional profiles. The detailed analysis of Jessica's mission data revealed technical innovations that challenged established doctrine about electronic warfare employment in contested environments. Her methods for coordinating aircraft movement with electromagnetic countermeasures had achieved effectiveness levels that existing theoretical models had predicted were impossible for single aircraft operations to accomplish. Dr. Marcus Webb found himself in the professionally embarrassing position of having to retract technical assessments that had dismissed Jessica's approaches as impractical for operational implementation. His expertise in electronic warfare systems had led him to conclude that her techniques would be ineffective against sophisticated enemy defenses, yet the mission data provided irrefutable evidence that his analysis had been fundamentally flawed. The psychological impact on squadron personnel who had participated in betting against Jessica's mission success created an atmosphere of reflection and reconsideration that extended throughout the base. Personnel who had expressed confidence that her mission would end in failure, were forced to confront the biases and assumptions that had influenced their assessments of her capabilities. General Patricia Hayes conducted a series of closed-door meetings with senior staff to address the institutional implications of Jessica's success and the broader questions it raised about military personnel evaluation and assignment procedures. The effectiveness of her performance suggested that current methods for assessing pilot readiness might be missing crucial indicators of potential combat effectiveness. Intelligence reports revealed that enemy forces throughout the Eastern European theater were experiencing morale problems and strategic confusion following the loss of their most heavily defended position. The psychological impact of Jessica's success had created advantages for coalition forces that extended far beyond the immediate logistical disruption caused by the bridge destruction. Staff Sergeant Torres received recognition from maintenance command for his role in preparing aircraft systems that had performed flawlessly under conditions that pushed both technology and human capabilities to their limits. His technical innovations had proven as crucial to mission success as Jessica's piloting skills, demonstrating that effective air operations required integrated excellence across all supporting functions. The broader implications for Air Force training and doctrine development became apparent as educators and planners recognized that Jessica's background in advanced scientific disciplines had provided knowledge that conventional pilot training programs didn't include. Her success suggested that future air combat effectiveness might require educational approaches that went beyond traditional aviation skills to include theoretical knowledge that most pilots had never been exposed to. Coalition partners who had been expressing concerns about American air power effectiveness were suddenly requesting detailed briefings about the techniques that had enabled Jessica's unprecedented success. NATO commanders recognized that her innovations represented solutions to tactical problems that had been limiting the effectiveness of multinational air operations against sophisticated adversary defenses. The international media attention surrounding Jessica's mission success began focusing on broader questions about women in combat roles and the institutional barriers that had nearly prevented her from demonstrating her capabilities. Her achievement provided powerful evidence that gender-based assumptions about combat effectiveness had been limiting military readiness by excluding potential contributions from qualified personnel. Enemy propaganda efforts that had previously focused on American military vulnerabilities were suddenly forced to explain how their most sophisticated defenses had been penetrated and defeated by forces they had dismissed as technologically inferior. The narrative of American decline that had been central to their information warfare campaigns was contradicted by Jessica's demonstration of superior tactical innovation. The scientific community's reaction to Jessica's success reflected recognition that her achievements had validated theoretical principles, while demonstrating practical applications that bridged the gap between academic research and operational military requirements. Her mission represented a successful translation of advanced scientific knowledge into military advantages that conventional approaches had been unable to achieve. Pentagon analysts began reassessing threat evaluations and capability assessments. In light of Jessica's demonstration that American air power possessed potential for effectiveness that had been underestimated by both allies and adversaries, her success suggested that properly trained and equipped pilots could overcome defensive challenges that had been considered insurmountable using conventional methods. The immediate tactical advantages created by Jessica's mission success enabled coalition ground forces to achieve breakthrough operations that had been impossible while enemy supply lines remained intact. The strategic objectives that had seemed beyond reach through conventional military operations were suddenly achievable as a result of her innovative approach to air warfare. Dr. Sarah Chun's analysis of mission data revealed that Jessica's techniques had achieved electromagnetic effects that approached theoretical maximum efficiency for the conditions she had encountered. The precision of her coordination between aircraft systems and countermeasures had created performance levels that validated scientific models while demonstrating their practical military applications. The psychological transformation within. The squadron reflected broader changes in military culture that Jessica's success had catalyzed. Personnel who had initially expressed skepticism about her capabilities were now seeking opportunities to learn from her innovations and understand the scientific principles that had enabled her unprecedented achievement. As the immediate shock of Jessica's success began to evolve into systematic analysis of its implications, military leaders recognized that her mission represented more than just tactical innovation. It demonstrated the potential for individual excellence to achieve strategic effects that conventional approaches had been unable to accomplish. Her success challenged institutional assumptions while proving that the most advanced military capabilities remain dependent on human creativity and determination. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.